Hello and welcome to another video for BMGS Tech. This one on generating technical drawings from the program 123D Design. So for this project we have a wooden chair which is going to be manufactured, and we need a series of drawings to do so. Trouble is that 123D Design is not really set up for doing this. There is an option where you can pay for premium and then you can export a 2D layout, and that gives you a DWG file, but I found that quite not very user friendly. Basically, you still need to import it into another CAD program and dimension it all, and it's not very easy to use. So we have a slight workaround using Photoshop and Illustrator. Okay, so we'll have a look at a finished one first, and what I've tried to do is dimension this to AS 1100 standard. So that's an Australian standard for engineering drawings, and that's to do with the title block, to do with how the dimensions are laid out, their position, everything like that. If you Google AS 1100, you'll find documents such as this one, which I'll put a link to in the description, that take you through the basics. The purpose of this video is not to teach AS 1100, but I will be pointing out some things as I go that you'll find helpful. But in your own time, do some reading up and you'll be able to find out a little bit more about what is required to do a really nice technical drawing. You can see that type of things that are important are how thick lines are, the positioning of the dimensions, the placement of the views. In Australia we use third angle projection. In the United States they use first angle projection. How to do hidden detail lines, and so forth. Back in this document you'll notice that everything is set up on different layers. That becomes a lot more obvious why we do that as we complete the drawing, but it's a good idea when you start your document to set up all of these empty layers as well. We have one for the title block, we have one for the title block text, and then these are empty at the moment, but we're going to have one where we put our views, one where we put our projection lines, arrows, and then dimensions. First thing we need to do back in 123D Design is to select which part we're going to do the drawing of, and what we want to do is hide every other component. For this example we're going to do one of these brace pieces down here, so I'm going to drag a box around as much as I can, except that will take a little while because there's many components here. Okay, now that we've made the selection, we click the eyeball and it will hide everything. That was a pretty good effort. We managed to get almost everything. So hide that as well, and now we have just the piece left that we wanted. Now that we've isolated the part we're going to do the drawing for, it's time to set up some views. First thing we need to do is turn off the grid. Second thing we need to do is make sure we're on Orthographic. This will give us very flat and perfect, dimensionally accurate views, rather than perspective, which is purposely distorting the view to make it look more realistic. Okay. It's important to get the exact amount of zoom for each picture because the scale needs to match. So I'm going to use the mouse wheel to zoom out once for each of these. And once I'm in position, I'm going to press print screen on the keyboard, come into Photoshop, paste, and then drag a box around my geometry. Paint bucket the white, and then Control C to copy. Switch to Illustrator, Control V to paste. And even though it's too big, we're going to leave it like that at the moment. We want to scale all of the views at the same time. Back for our next view, rotate, see that it's zoomed in, so one mouse wheel outwards to match, print screen, switch to Photoshop, paste, drag the box around the geometry, paint bucket the background white, copy, Illustrator, paste. For such a simple part as this we only need one more view, so we'll switch to one of the end views, mouse wheel out once, print screen, paste, select our geometry, paint bucket, copy, paste. Okay, next job is to position these views where they should be for third angle projection. We can use the mouse to begin, but then the keyboard key is very useful for nudging, so you can move it only a few pixels at a time. And we want everything to line up perfectly because that's one of the features of these type of drawings. Okay, in third angle projection, the top view should be on top, the side view should be to the side, and it's really quite logical in terms of that. So just remember that when you're laying out. Everything should line up perfectly, and the relationship between each of the views is very important. In our first drawing, we had a scale of 1 to 10. So we can get that fairly accurate with the technique I'm about to demonstrate. So now we're going to use the ruler tool to take a measurement from the actual part. So I'm going to get the overall length for this. So click on start and end, and we can see that we have a distance of 550. Back in Illustrator, we're going to draw a temporary line which is going to help us find that scale. We go to the line tool and we click just once, we don't drag. I'm going to set up this line to be 55 because that is 1/10 of 550. I'm going to set the angle to 0, which should be flat. And we hit OK. Now at the moment this line actually has no color, so let's make it a little bit more obvious. And we can see that if we scale down the total length to this, it's actually going to be very small. So we might do this again at 1 to 5 scale. Therefore, we're aiming for an overall length on the page of 110, so double that. Okay, we're going to select each of our views which are lined up, and I'm going to group them, Control G, just so they move around together. And we're going to start to shrink them until we can match this red line. Zoom in for some clarity. And once again we use the keyboard to nudge the view into place. We can see it needs to be a little bit bigger. Once we get to fine tuning, we can actually lock the constraints and use our controls up here, match the keyboard, and that is looking quite accurate. So now we know we have it on the page at 1 to 5 scale. We can delete this line and position this a little bit nicer. Might be a good idea to ungroup this now and spread out these views. Before we forget, we're going to unlock our title block, double click, and we're going to change the scale to 1 to 5. Okay, we're ready to start doing some annotation. Looking at our example one that's already been complete, we can see the type of style that we need. Each dimension has a projection line on each edge, an arrow that touches those, and then the actual dimension. The actual dimension should always match the angle and be above or to the left hand side. So when you're viewing the page, you only ever need to look from two angles. That's from our normal orientation, or if we rotated the page 90 degrees, we'd be able to read all of the dimensions that are on the left. Fortunately, this is a straightforward process in Illustrator. One important thing to make sure you have ticked is Smart Guides. This will help us snap to lines as we draw them. So we're going to lock our views, title block, layers, and we might start drawing some projection lines. We'll zoom in to make this a little bit easier. Okay, first thing we might like to dimension is the overall length. Unfortunately, we can't snap to the actual picture, but we have to do it by eye and get it as accurate as possible. We shall hold Shift on the keyboard to keep the line straight and make sure that we're drawing it with a black outline. Now when we draw our next one, we can see that it's snapping with the green line to the first. And this is a very handy thing about Illustrator. You could do the same process in another program, but you're going to find it much harder. We'll dimension our interior part here. If you're having trouble getting the lines to snap, you can hover the mouse over and then slowly pull it away, and hopefully that will maintain the relationship. If you're still having trouble, we can use another trick where we select something with the normal selection tool. We hold Alt on the keyboard and then we click and drag, and it makes a copy of it the exact size. If I hold Shift, it will lock it horizontally, and it's just a matter of bringing this out until it is perfectly in line. We can nudge with the keyboard if need be afterwards. Other dimensions that we'll want for this drawing are the overall height. Hold Shift to lock it in. Once again, our snapping is being very useful. We'll need to do the width. This is probably the hardest bit, getting this precise the first time you do it. But after that, you can see that everything snaps to what's already there. If you do want to change something, the white pointer tool will let you select just one end of something. And now I can use the keyboard. I'm actually going to move these a little bit closer. Okay, other things we might need to dimension are the overall width of the timber piece. Zooming in might also help your accuracy. I want to snap to here, hold Shift, if you're unhappy with the accuracy of any of these, you can see this left one slightly off. Click on it and use the keyboard keys to nudge it. There's also up the top here the transform tool. I can move this very small amounts. So the X being the starting position on the page, so I'm going to take away 0.2 from that, and you can trial and error until you're happy with the accuracy. Probably only one more dimension that we need, and that is this short distance here. So I'm going to zoom in, and line this up as best as I can. And that should complete all of my projection lines. Now it's time to switch to the arrow, so I'm going to lock the projection lines. All this means is that I can still snap to them, but I can't accidentally click and move them around or anything annoying like that. That's going to ruin the drawing. For the arrows, I'm going to use the line tool again, and I'm simply going to snap from one side to the other. Actually, I'm going to do that one slightly differently. I'll come out here. And once again, because we have smart guides on, every time we start drawing, it's going to try and snap with the previous lines that we've done, which makes it very easy for us to do a nice looking drawing. Okay, now we have all of our arrow lines in place, and because they're on a separate layer and we've locked the other layers, it becomes quite an easy task to turn them into arrows. So we can drag a box around all of them, and over on the stroke tab, if you don't have it, you need to double click to open it up completely. Okay, now we have arrowheads, and we can select them, and they're probably a little bit big, so now's a good time to change the scale as well. So I probably want about 60%. So one's for the left and one's for the right with this dialog. And I can come down to the drawing and check that everything's okay. There's probably only 3 of them that need fixing. This one here only needs an arrow on one end, so I set that to none. Okay, we're ready to add our dimensions. So I'm going to lock the arrows, switch to the dimension layer, and do my first piece of text. Now we already know that the overall length is 550, so I'll start with that one. If we're dimensioning to AS1100 standards, we should be above the dimension line and in the middle. Now it's a case of switching back and forth between the two programs to input our dimensions. So we would use the ruler tool again to measure some various bits. So this one is 60. I'm going to do a couple at a time to speed it up. This one is 18. So I'll come back to here. I might zoom in to make this a little bit clearer what I'm doing. And like we did earlier, if we hold the Alt key and click and drag, and then double click on the text, it's a much faster way of doing new text boxes without having to use the actual text tool on the side. And this one needs to be rotated 90 degrees and positioned above the arrow. Now that I've got one sideways, I'm going to use that as my source to copy some of the others. So this piece is 60. This one is 18 to match the thickness of the timber on the piece that it slots through. Okay, almost complete. $5.14 for this one. And then our final dimension is for overall width. I can snap it to my other one so it's all consistent. It's one of the key things when dimensioning. And this one is in 80 millimeters. Okay, so we now have all the dimensions necessary to make this part. The advantage of putting everything on separate layers like we have means if we want to change the font size, for instance, of all of these dimensions, we can just lock the other layers, and then it's a simple case of dragging the box around and we can change the font style, size, weight, anything that we like. Okay, so some final touches here. At the moment we have a stroke of 1, so that's the line weight for all of our various parts, but they should actually be a little bit different. So the arrows we're going to make slightly slimmer. So I'm going to select all of the arrows and I'm going to change the stroke on those to 0.75, and then I'm going to lock that and select all of the projection lines. And change the stroke on those to 0.5. They should be a lot finer and more subtle. Okay, on our template for the title block, we already had third angle projection. We have already named the drawing. We have all dimensions in millimeters, do not scale. We have the person drawing it, the date. A drawing number is always a good idea. Here I've got part 2 and it's revision A. If I then change this in the future, I can make it part 2B and so forth. The scale is matched, which means this drawing is more or less complete. The only other thing that we would add is probably on the title block text layer, and that would to be labeling each of the views. So I might copy out one of these, and all of our text should be in capitals if we're dimensioning to the correct standard. And our drawing is complete.